I like salad. Do you like salad?
Hi, I'm Hostion Ho. I'm living in Vancouver, BC, Canada, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm an immigrant to Canada from China.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrea, coming to you from Victoria, but more importantly known as unceded Akwesasne territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and I am an immigrant from the United States of America. And you're listening to
Canadian salad.
Canadian salad. Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited for you to be here listening to us on episode 6. And Hostion is here as well. Do you want to say hi, Hostion?
Hi. Yes, I think people will assume I'm here.
I hope so. I hope they assume, because I can't do this without you. So, yeah, no, it's true.
A one-woman show can be fun sometimes.
It could be. Well, maybe if you go on vacation, I can do my one-woman show and I can do all of these jokes about squirrels. I don't even know what I would do, but it wouldn't be as engaging as with my one and only Hostion. So, yes.
Yeah. Mark, please don't listen to this. Mark, don't listen to this.
Mark, my husband, is not listening though. But Hostion, do you want to shed light on what we're going to talk about today?
Yes, today, in the light of Truth and Reconciliation Day, we're going to talk about Indigenous people of Canada and their relationships to immigrants.
Yeah, I am so excited about this topic, and I feel like there was a lot I did not know and still do not know in my journey, but I'm so glad to have this conversation. And I think this is a good conversation for both immigrant and non-immigrant alike, because we're really going to capitalize on the ways in which, our knowledge and awareness of history and the truth does make an profound impact on reconciliation and making better pathways to meet the calls for action outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation.
Yes, and I also want to give a credit to Andrea, because I remember when we first when Andrea first brought this idea up, I was a bit hesitant because I always worry that neither of us are Indigenous. To talk about this issue can be a bit sensitive, but Andrea did say that it is our responsibility as much as theirs to tell their story, to shed lights on their struggle, and let people know the history and also their joy.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you, Andrea, for bringing this up and enlightening me as well to have this conversation. And also a disclaimer in some sense, as I just mentioned, neither of us are Indigenous, so we're approaching this topic with the utmost respect. We're only giving personal perspectives.
Absolutely.
In many ways.
And we do humbly welcome and invite, more conversations, but we just want to highlight, like Hostion said, the relationship that immigrants and the immigration experience has with the Indigenous people of Canada. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So now, Andrea, do you have any related news you want to share with us?
I do, yes. So there was a great article that came out back in February of this year, and it's the New Canadian Media. It's a news source written by immigrants and sharing perspectives, local journalism, national news, and everything like that. But the title was "In Colonization and Immigration in Canada, A History of Disillusionment." And in the article, it really talks about what happens to the immigrant experience when immigrants come to Canada. Many of us are sold this idea that, Canada is just this free world and, it's really welcoming and it loves its people and it loves diversity. And then when immigrants land here, and if we are at all able to hear a land acknowledgement or learn about the actual history of the Indigenous peoples, all of a sudden, that dream or that picture that we had of Canada becomes a disillusionment. And what is that relationship between the immigrant and the Indigenous community? I think it's a very good article. We'll link it into our resources. But one thing it highlights is that many immigrants, when they come to Canada, do not have an exposure to any type of education or historical factual representation or even land acknowledgements in their first year. And so there is this missing piece of knowledge when newcomers come to Canada. And so, so in that vein, then, when someone is exposed to the reality of what has happened to Indigenous people in Canada, whether through the residential schools, whether it was through the genocide, the diseases, the ways in which people were forced to stay on reserves and their treaties were broken, there is this tension, and we're going to talk about this later, but there is this tension of, I live here, I'm an immigrant, I know that I am not a part of the narrative to colonize it. At the same time, how do I hold the truth that I've been presented about Indigenous people and their history and advocate for, even walk both of these identities in some ways? Because I had a dream of Canada and now it's broken.
I agree. I think many of us, I think in our previous episode, we also talked about that before coming to Canada, we had this idea of Canada or lack of this idea of Canada. But I believe both of us have this version of Canada, which is almost a fairy tale that is, all people are nice, the country is great. And then when we came here, faced the reality of that dark, even gruesome history of Canada, of colonization, that bubble bursts. And then now we face this reality of, even though I'm not responsible of any of this hurt, which was done by, previous colonizers, but I'm still benefiting that. Was still benefiting from colonization because I am an immigrant here.
Right.
Yes. So I think that kind of struggle also lead us to more discussion of then what now after this?
Right.
What is there for us to do?
Right.
How we face it. Yes.
You're absolutely right. You come here as a newcomer and you're still reaping a lot of those benefits, like you said, in the colonial system, while Indigenous people are still just trying to get clean water or just, equal access to basic human rights in this country.
Exactly. I mean, all the wealth and the power that we came to Canada for, in some sense, are stolen from the Indigenous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the immigration policies that are developed are not inclusive to Indigenous people.
I agree.
Indigenous leaders are not invited to the table to say, hey, what could we do? We want your input and perspective. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But essentially what this is it does highlight two calls to action. So if you're not familiar with the calls to action, the Truth and Reconciliation Act, there are quite a few calls on the government of Canada to make reconciliation, to repatriate, to make amends for what's been done. And two of those calls actually relate to the immigration experience. So number 93, the call to action is that we call upon the federal government in collaboration with the national Aboriginal organizations to revise the information kit for newcomers to Canada and its citizenship test to reflect a more inclusive history of the diverse Aboriginal peoples of Canada, including information about treaties and the history of residential schools. This, from my understanding, has not necessarily manifested. That call to action has not been completed.
Exactly. I took the citizenship test not long ago. And it has only like a paragraph to talk about the Indigenous culture or the residential school compared to like pages and pages of the English and the French history in Canada. So that the proportion definitely is not right in that citizenship test booklet.
Yeah, exactly. If you go to the Government of Canada's website, there has been talk that we are revising these toolkits, but nothing's been published. And well, we're not getting those toolkits with that information, right?
We have not yet, yes.
No. But Hostion, when you took your oath to become a Canadian citizen, do you remember what that oath said?
Well, I have to I swear my allegiance to the King, Charles.
Yeah. to the king. But then this was added in the oath, which was part of call to action number 94. I swear that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples, and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. So we've got like 5 words-ish in the oath. In some ways, it's like, okay, we met that call to action, but what does this actually mean for us as immigrants living in Canada, knowing that Indigenous people are not invited to the table when it comes to immigration policies, and there are still unfulfilled calls to action?
I agree. I think there definitely should have more material for newcomers, including the toolkit or even in the citizenship test booklet to educate or shed light on the history of Indigenous in Canada for sure, because we are in their land. I think many newcomers, once they land in Canada, whether they go to class or go to any official conference, when there's land acknowledgement, without those knowledge, they probably will even confuse them. What is this land acknowledgement for? And then they will have nowhere to understand the importance of land acknowledgement.
Right, exactly. And if you can do a Google search of like, oh, land acknowledgement or Indigenous people, you've got a lot of websites that are written by white colonial bodies that are like, here's some information. And it's like, no, we don't want that version. We want an honest telling. And I, not to say that some ministries are not telling honest stories. I think some are gaining more traction in some provinces than others. But when it comes to our own responsibility of how to educate ourselves, a lot of times we don't know where to go. And so we might hear maybe a racial slur, it might be a stereotype. And sometimes that informs and shapes the way that we as immigrants view Indigenous people, which is not right at all.
Yes, I think it ultimately also will lead to how we participate in the cause of liberating or improving their living standards of all the Indigenous in Canada as well. Because if we have misinformation, that if we don't understand the true struggle or the situation they're in, then we won't join the cause to help them as well.
Right.
To uplift all of us.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that in the article, it does touch a point where immigrants who came from oppressive societies or systems or countries have a lot of understanding of what the experience for Indigenous people has been. And so in many ways, people who come from those places often tend to be stronger advocates, better allies, more involved because they understand the experience.
Yes.
They understand what it is to be oppressed by a dominant government and a majority culture. To segue, Hostion, you and I both attended Royal Roads, and I'm just curious, when you first heard the land acknowledgement, what was your experience? Or even when you first learned any Indigenous history?
First, I was a bit surprised. When I first heard it, I was definitely a bit confused and surprised because I have lived in places where, like in the States and Australia, which also have Indigenous culture, but none of this place has any formal or commonly used land acknowledgement in public settings. So I was never really used to that. So that's first. And then one thing World Road did really good for us is they actually not just did a land acknowledgement. The school actually took us to cultural centers and even classes and courses to teach us, not very in-depth in many ways, but at least a brief understanding, a brief overview of the Indigenous history in Canada, covers like in residential school, and we even have the elders told us their personal stories with their struggle with their family and all that. And many of the stories is very sad and very traumatizing in many ways. And as I mentioned before, it definitely burst my bubble of what I thought of Canada as like this strong, wealthy and powerful country. And so yeah, that's definitely my kind of first impression I had, and how I first reacted when I was introduced to land acknowledgement and the history of indigenous culture. What about you? What was your reaction?
Yeah, I think I resonate with a lot of what you said. When I moved to Canada, huge shout out to Royal Roads University, like you said. Honestly, I think it was maybe the first or second class that we took.
Even
It was,
orientation, yeah, there
yeah, I
was
think it was
orientation classes,
orientation.
yeah.
Yeah, and they told us about the Indian hospitals, the residential schools, and what had happened. And I remember my heart just sinking down to my feet. I still remember that feeling. I was completely wrecked to hear what had been done, not only in the name of a government, but in the name of God, in the name of like divine right, which I do have a faith. And so when I heard that, it crushed me in the most good way that it needed to. Hearing the story from the elder, their personal story, was incredibly hard and very traumatic. At the same time, though, it was really, really important. I was really, really thankful that I had heard. And when I started hearing more land acknowledgements, I remember thinking, man, why don't we do this in the States? I mean, we can compare the two countries, in many ways. Canada is acknowledging this past and this history. But in the States, I mean, it is crickets. No one's really talking about it. Of course, Native Americans and Indigenous people from Turtle Island are always talking about
I
and
mean, yeah,
always
it's
advocating for their
part of
rights.
their history too, right?
Right.
When new people coming to the land, they always do land acknowledgement. It has
Yeah.
been done for hundreds of years
Yeah.
in all these nations.
Yeah. It's a powerful act to do a land acknowledgement because all of a sudden it shifts the way that you think. It shifts the way in which you remember what brought you here, or even what your responsibility is. Like you said, I'm here now. What do I do with this? How do I take action? How do I be involved? How do I make a difference in a positive way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the land acknowledgement definitely like pushed me to learn more about the indigenous culture and history in Canada. Part of it also led me to look into the indigenous relationship with the Chinese immigrant.
Oh,
Yeah, in Canada, which I
I would
again
love for
with
you. Yeah. I mean, you're going to
yeah.
share, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna share that. Yes. So basically, in the 1800s, many Chinese were in BC because of the Pacific Railway rebuilding they
Right.
were building for Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then comes the head tax, and then they were, of course, like heavily discriminated. Um, and many of them found a refuge in reserve land. It was the
Really?
indigenous who welcomed many of the Chinese immigrants, yes, that were facing extreme conditions under much discrimination. For example, one of the the Musqueam Nations, which is right now in Vancouver, close to Kerrisdale, Richmond area,
Okay.
there was a lot of Chinese farmland. Because of discrimination laws, there's a lot of limitation to allow Chinese own land or lease land or own business and all sorts of things, just limit their activity in many ways. Indigenous people still welcomes these Chinese that came to their land that, as some said, looking for help. And refuge.
Yeah.
And many Chinese started to farm there because reserve land is fertile land, and then they were starting farm there. The Musqueam Nations definitely helped many Chinese families to have a life there.
Mm.
They welcome them not just in the business sense or leasing land to them, but also in the sense that many Chinese also marry into Musqueam nations, so they welcome them in the sense of a unity as well.
Wow.
So yeah, is when I look into those stories, I also found that kind of strength within me as well, and also as some also irony because we always say immigration or the country allows you to the land, but then the government who technically is, quote unquote allows you to come into the land, but they were not the one who taking care of you. It was the one that they are trying to, try many means to erase, the one who welcomes you, which come back to the land acknowledgement. When they said they welcome you, they mean they welcome you with open arms.
Yeah.
Not like the government just a stamp and they don't care about what you do, live or die. And the other irony is, the British and the French always, said the indigenous were barbaric, which, why they have residential school, try to culture them, educate them. But then they're actually the one who barbarically tried to, use head tax, use Chinese Seclusion Act, all these things to break up families and break spirits of these people, provide very harsh conditions for Chinese workers. They were the one actually barbaric and cruel. And yet this culture, quote unquote, indigenous people are the one actually who's loving and caring of outsiders.
Right. Wow.
So for me, that is a very powerful story that I learned, and also give me definitely a lot of new respect and perspective to the indigenous community and the love that I have for them as well.
Yeah. I didn't know that there was that kind of existing relationship between indigenous communities and Chinese immigrants, but in many ways, just from a humane standpoint, like if I know that what I've experienced is awful and I see someone else experiencing awful things, it's only natural that I'll be like, hey, I will help you out. I will be a source of refuge. I will welcome you because, gosh, this really is awful. In many ways, we need each other and we'll take care of each other because other people are not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you. Not that I can, on behalf of any Chinese here, but I just want to say thank you to all the indigenous community that also welcome, our ancestors, to give them a home, give them a place. Also give them that humanity maybe they were lacking at that time, at the darkest time, and give them a helping hand.
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful, Hostion.
Yes.
I
mean, in general, I think the indigenous community definitely contributes so much to the Canadian great culture, not just specifically to the Chinese immigrants, but we also want to highlight that they are contributing so much to Canada as well.
Yeah. Yes. And have for years and years and years, despite the way that they've been treated. They've still given back. If there is someone who should be making decisions, I feel like it is people within the Indigenous community, First Nations people, non-First Nations people, in the sense of like the original inhabitants of this land, because they're the ones who took care of our earth. They're the ones who have the answers in how to keep taking care of our earth, but not only that, each other. There is so much about the indigenous beliefs and like mindset of like faith and love for one another.
Sustainability, about how they treat the environment as well, which we can learn a lot from them.
Balance, taking only what you need so that others have enough. There's just all of these beautiful, beautiful things. Hostion, do you want to talk about a person who has contributed greatly to Canada?
I want to talk about Bill Reid, because when I landed in Vancouver International Airport, one of the first sculpture that I remember was this jade canoe. First, it's impressive in size in general.
It's huge,
and also it's so distinctively indigenous art, and that was like front and center. And I remember I was a bit shocked in some sense, because indigenous art, and it's beautiful, obviously. And of course, back then I was not thinking too much, just landed. I wanted to go to the next place, get my immigration status, everything. But that image of indigenousness in display in this big, beautiful statue in the international airport. It's something that it belongs to the indigenous, and it has the indigenous representation is front and center. At least that's at least a message. That's how I perceive it at that point. And that statue is made by Bill Reid, which is a famous Haida indigenous artist who make also other many famous sculpture as well, like the orca in front of Vancouver Aquarium, and in the UBC Anthropology Museum, there's also a famous statue of the raven and the first man. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Yes, that was also made by Bill Reid. So as of course as a very as an internationally renowned artist, and with so many important pieces, just started around Vancouver especially, he definitely contributes so much to the representation, for the storytelling and the artistry to Canada in general.
Yeah.
So I want to shout out to Bill Reid.
Bill Reid, yes. And if you do come to BC and you come internationally, I don't know about domestic flights. I don't know if Bill has his art displayed, because I also flew into the Vancouver airport from the States. And I remember there's quite a few displays of Indigenous artwork and sculptures on your way down to the immigration line, where you have to declare all your goods and, get questioned and all that stuff. So if you do come to Canada, if you're listening in the States or anywhere else, China, just be prepared to be blown away. It is incredibly beautiful art, and it's so peaceful.
It
emotes a lot of peace, tranquility. And whenever I fly back to Canada, I just feel like, I'm
Me
home.
too. I definitely have that feeling too every time I arrive at Vancouver Airport.
Yes. And I think that Bill Reid's art and that expression and representation of Indigenous people is a huge part of that piece.
I agree.
Thank you for sharing Bill Reid. We'll include maybe a link to a webpage that highlights his art and everything like that. One thing I want to highlight.
What about you, Andrea? Do you have anything you want to share as well?
Yes, I do. So I was really preparing for this episode, and I wanted to learn more, and I learned a lot. Indigenous people on Turtle Island, this is both, in Canada and the United States, contributed immensely in creating undecipherable code using their own ethnic languages. So they're called code talkers, but basically during World War I and World War II, Canada and the States needed a way to communicate in a way so that the enemy would not intercede those messages. I'm not exactly sure what originated the idea, but the concept was that Indigenous people speak their own unique language. And because it's not widely known, it became a huge role in developing code for Canadian troops, for American troops to communicate with one another in World War I and World War II. I did not see that there had been any acknowledgement or thanks to Indigenous people who enlisted into the military and provided that. And one theory around that is because many of them were sworn to not share that this was something that Canada used. And so some people would not even tell their own family members. But in many ways, having their language save and prevent maybe even further disaster, I think is just symbolic of another way in which Indigenous people are truly worthy of every kind of respect and dignity and equality and access to human rights than anyone else that I know. It really humbles you, because you look at history, you look in the ways in which even Indigenous communities raised money to help support the war fund. This is in the midst of residential schools. This is when babies and children are being taken away, and they're still believing in, and they're still advocating and working for this collective goal of, we want to contribute. That's a type of heart and a spirit that I just want to know even more. And I want to emulate so much more, because it's such an example to me, and I think to the world.
Their contribution to Canada definitely is immense.
Huge.
Absolutely.
There's huge. So many things that, of course, has not gone told. And I just hope that we can both, and all of us listening, can be a part of advocating for that history to be more alive and be more well known.
I definitely agree. Is there any way you think that we as newcomers should engage or should contribute to the Indigenous communities?
Absolutely. I'm going to list maybe 4 or 5 different ways that we as immigrants, newcomers, can contribute. One of them is just be willing to take responsibility on learning the history of Indigenous people. It is Canada's history. You cannot separate the two. This is the history of where we now live and breathe. There is a wonderful website. You can access it on your phone, and we'll link it in our resources, but it's called Native Land. And if you click on it, you can actually type in the city that you live in, and it will show you what territory it is, what people group or First Nation it belongs to. And often there will be links to that particular First Nations or Indigenous organization's website, so you can learn more information about who they are, the history, if the territory is ceded or unceded. There's another resource that's really good, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And it's a book that I want to read, but tells you all these things that you probably will never hear in just regular conversations or even from this podcast. The reality is that reconciliation cannot happen without the truth. We cannot go forward in our future if we do not acknowledge the past, because if we want to move forward, and I've heard people say this, well, we just need it, the past is the past. Let's just move forward. And it's like, sorry, no, the only way to move forward is to carry the past with you and say, don't repeat this. This is how you heal this. This is how you repair this, because we'll just keep repeating. And we've kept repeating it. The second thing I would recommend is just enroll yourself in a local workshop led by local First Nations or Indigenous organizations for education resources related to the Indigenous people and First Nations and their relationship to Canada where you live. So that's another way. Read the Truth and Reconciliation Act and the calls to action. Just read it. It's just be familiar with it, understand what it's asking. I think it really illuminates a lot of the things that were done to communities of people and how Canada needs to do better. So that's another piece. The other thing would be to advocate for ministries and policies to include Indigenous voices in leadership in immigration policy making. The fact that we're not including the very people whose land we are standing on is another way that we are dismissing and disrespecting them. And it goes against the UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. So we'll include that link, but that outlines what rights Indigenous people should have globally. And one of them is actually, I'll just read it briefly here. It requires that free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples be obtained in matters of fundamental importance for their rights, survival, dignity, and well-being. So it's basically saying respect their perspective, don't jump ahead. And actually, the last line of this particular line is that any type of legislation or policy must occur in Indigenous languages so that they fully understand of what those policies are, and on Indigenous people's timeframes. Time and control is very Western, and it is a part of white supremacy. For many people of Indigenous cultures, it is all about having them lead that timing and having them decide when they're ready to enact something or make a decision. So advocate, vote for people who you know are going to be a part of that, and know what's happening locally. I was so thankful. I learned about this woman just real quickly who was running for the school district. She was running for the school board. The school board had never had an Indigenous person on their school board.
What?
Yes. And so I was like, you know what? I want to get her on that school board. So I canvassed for her. I went around my neighborhood. I handed out leaflets and I talked to people and I said, we need Indigenous representation on the school board. And I'm so happy she was elected to the school board. It was really, really exciting. But things like that are happening locally in your neighborhood, things that are, in your town are really, really important. And then the last thing, it's so, so easy. Give and invest to Indigenous owned and Indigenous led businesses.
Yes.
So put Amazon away. Throw Amazon away. I get some of you might need Amazon for certain
Amazon
things.
who?
Okay.
I don't know her.
Amazon what? I don't know.
I don't know her.
Yeah. She does not dress well. But local, keep things local. And if you know of restaurants that are owned by Indigenous people or fashion, there's a lot of Indigenous owned businesses.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add to also one thing I really like about Rice Cake events that we're doing is every time we do land acknowledgement in all our events, we
Mhm.
always try to hire an indigenous person to do land acknowledgement, which is, of course, we pay them as well, compensate them
Yeah,
as well. And I think that's one way for us to show our respect. And also it's a formal
absolutely.
welcome from, literally the people who actually reside on this land,
Yeah,
who
that's
walked
great.
before us here.
Yes,
Yes.
that's a great idea. And it builds
Yes.
that relationship, right?
I agree. Yeah. I think that, that can be an easy and a beautiful thing to do.
That's great. Thank you, Hoshin.
No
That's
problem.
wonderful. Yeah. This has been, again, just such a good conversation. And
It is.
again, we are two people and two perspectives. And if any of you have felt like we've spoken for Indigenous people, please accept our apology. That is not what we want to do here at all. But we are providing our perspective on the impact, the amazing, incredible, positive impact that Indigenous people, culture, nations have made on us as immigrants. And we only hope that all of you out there are just as impressed, are just as impacted in a positive way, because we are one big global family, and we don't have time to compete for anything. Like, let's just work together. Our humanity needs it.
Yes. Also, our podcasts are really short, right? We can't cover
Yeah, that's
everything.
true. No,
We
that's true
take,
too.
yeah.
That's true. Well, it's time for our Canadian pop quiz, where we
Ooh.
ask each other questions that we don't know the answers to the other person's question, and it's fun and it's exciting, and maybe it's dramatic or maybe it's super boring, but it's time for us to learn. So,
Yes, let's learn
ding, ding,
something. Do
ding.
you want to go first, Andrea? Because usually I go first.
I do. I would love to go first. Okay, Hoshin.
Yes, you go.
How many recognized First Nations are there currently in Canada?
Oh my God, this is exactly the same question I prepared for you. So I know the
it isn't.
answer. I know the answer
Let's
to
see
that.
if we have the same answer. Let's just see our research actually maybe.
Okay.
Good
The
job.
answer
Okay.
I have is 634 nations.
That's right. That's right.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, 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 ding. Ding for both of us. Yay.
Yay. See, that's how much we think alike. If we had prepared the same question for each other.
We're amazing. We were born in the same month, so it makes sense. Do you know where the majority of First Nations reside? Which provinces?
BC.
And
Ontario.
Good job. Good job.
I
So
know. I think we searched too. See,
it's
we prepare.
true.
We always
weren't,
prepare.
Yeah. We would not be master students if we didn't just, oh, look, a Yahoo article. I'll use
let's
that.
just wing it. Let's just wing this thing. Okay.
Exactly. We also want to point out that in this statistic, 634 groups, that does not include other recognized people groups like Métis, Inuit, non-status and status Indian, Aboriginal peoples are not included in First Nations that recognize First Nations count. Just so you know that there is a lot of diversity. When we say Indigenous, First Nation, Aboriginal, there is a lot of diversity when it comes to people groups. So everyone do your homework and know what those terms mean. But yeah, so congratulations, Hoshin. You're a mind reader.
Too.
Thank you so much. I can't believe I got the answer and you did too.
We both got the answer. Yay.
Yeah. So Hoshin, do you want to give us a little preview of what we're going to talk about next episode?
Oh my God, next episode. Oh my God, I'm so excited. We're going to talk about something that we kind of mentioned also in this episode. Is about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yes.
Which, in some sense, very shameful history of Canada. Same as their treatment to the Indigenous communities. Give you a little glimpse of how the Chinese community struggled and how the Canadian government were trying to erase them from their rightful place in Canada.
Wow. I'm excited to learn. I know it's not going to be easy information, but I am excited to learn. I'm excited for you to share. So stay tuned, listen, and always please refer us to your friends. We are on Instagram, Canadian Salad. We do have a website. You can listen to our episodes there and learn more and see pictures of Hoshin and moi, canadiansalad.ca. And if you have any ideas or discussion points that you want us to discuss, I mean, we've got a big list, but we would love to hear from you. There is a form on our website that you can, add comments or suggestions, ideas, that sort of a thing. And we'd love to hear from you. So.
Exactly. And our podcast is also in all the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of them, Amazon Music. So please go give us a follow and then listen to our episodes. And if you have any suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah. And a great review. 5 stars.
Please do. Please give it 5 stars. Yeah, refer us to everyone. Yes,
5
and
gold
sponsor
stars.
us.
Yes,
that's the best,
exactly. This is simple. It's a very simple ask. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you real soon. Have a good week.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hostion Ho and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avetyan from Pixabay.
This has been a good Drinklin production.